I have no light over there. Hi, people. How do you do? What is going on here? You know, it's weird. I can't, it's like I'm a talking head. Okay. So, today, I have like shadow on my face. Can I go like this? Yeah, anyway. Not the best lighting in here. Sorry, guys. So, here's the book. Fascinating. So, what I'm going to read today is quite interesting because it's about eugenics. Oh my God. And it talks about the mid 1800s when it all kind of got started. So, the foreword says, for the inhabitants of Planet 9. After the publication of my book, Mind Control, World Control, I was contacted by many persons with new information on the subject of human control. Both researchers in the field, as well as some persons who believe that they have been the subject of abuse by intelligence and other agencies. The necessity for an update and an expansion of my earlier research became apparent. This book is the result. As always, I was greatly assisted by my personal friends, network of fellow researchers, and readership. Special thanks are due to my family, who continue to tolerate my odd hours in bohemian brain style, and to my publishers, to whom I owe much gratitude. This was copyrighted in 1999. Okay, people? And here's a statement by Adolf Hitler, a quote, which I think is fascinating. What luck for rulers that men do not think. So, the first chapter is Origins of Control. So, keep in mind that I think that the origins of control are much older than what this guy's talking about. But nonetheless, this is the modern origins of control, if you will, in terms of the mind and steering of genetics, right? I also, from my own research and my own soul's history and journey, I do feel that Atlantis is where we had a pretty severe compromise happen. And I also feel like it went from Atlantis and then it resurfaced in Rome, specifically the Roman Empire, and then resurfaced again in the Middle Ages, of course, but then in the late 1800s it's where it really like grabbed hold, right? In terms of like, well, so in the late 1600s was Mayor Amschel, I believe his name was. No, that wasn't his name. Oh, that's the Rothschild guy. The guy that started the Illuminati. So anyway, that started in the late 1600s and then started to gain traction into the 1700s. And then at a certain point, the royal family was broke. And then so the Rothschilds, in exchange for saving their ass financially, they had to agree to breed with royalty, or the royalty had to agree to breed with the Rothschilds. Okay, so, and here we are, the bankers. So on top of all of that, though, in the 1800s, okay, hold on. So after the breeding started, Queen Victoria was the first royal that ruled. And she was not exactly, she was no bueno. And Queen Anne wasn't that great either, Henry VIII's daughter. And there was Queen Elizabeth I. but the actual bloodline breeding thing that caused the evil to become prevalent was when the Rothschilds and the royals bred together. And from that point, you know, the popes, everybody was involved, and it got really crazy really fast. Okay, so here we are, the year 2020. Hindsight is 2020, right? And we have this book that was written 20 years ago, basically. And so the reason I like these types of books, okay, is because a lot of reasons. Well, one of the main reasons is because back then, right, there was no internet. Everything had to be researched through encyclopedias. You had to really do a lot of research and back your shit up via bibliography, like a whole listing in the back of like where you got all your information. You had to prove your point in a book. You couldn't just like write whatever and have somebody believe it. Just that's not the way we did things. The way that it was like journalism, right? In journalism, like you're supposed to check every fact, cross every T, dot every I. You're supposed to, you know, ad nauseum. You're supposed to really check your facts before you put something out there. That's not what we have today in modern journalism. And so it's sort of left up to us now to go back and check things. But I also, you know, I really work with my gut and my tuning into my own information that I receive from remote viewing standards and things of that nature. Okay, so here we go. Chapter 1. Origins of Control. Agents of the world's elite have been long engaged in a war on the populace of Earth. Greed is the motivation for this war, a greed so pervasive that it encompasses the planet and all of the beings on it. But in recent times, a philosophy has been used to justify that greed. It is the philosophy of mass control that ultimately aims at dictating every aspect of human life, even remolding man's perception of reality and himself. Although the lust for control can be discerned since the beginning of recorded history, a nexus of particular importance arose in Germany in the latter half of the 19th century. As the country increased in military and industrial might, becoming the strongest power in Europe, a revolution simultaneously took place in German philosophic and scientific thought that paradoxically would spread through the world to create positive technological change, as well as to birth innumerable toxic children. According to one source, quote, the sudden change from relative political weakness to world power and from economic insecurity to prosperity proved to be a great strain on the German character and public life. The spread of materialistic philosophy of life was worldwide in this age, and the idolatry of power was not confined to Germany. But its corrosive effect was particularly strong in a country that was not inured to power. End quote. One aspect of this transformation, this idolatry of power, was a negative transformation of the psychological sciences. In the late 19th century, earlier, more humanistic approaches to understanding mankind were replaced by a scientific philosophy that would be employed less as a measure for the understanding of man than as a justification for a new feudalism and a mechanism of pure control. The materialist overhauling of psychology was in great part ushered in by the work of the German psychologist Wilhelm Maximilian Wundt, W-U-N-D-T, Wundt was a professor of philosophy at the University of Leipzig, and in 1875 established the world's first psychological laboratory there. 1875, people. 1875. A move that would eventually turn the world of more humanistic-oriented philosophy on its head. A move that would eventually turn the world of more humanistic-oriented psychology on its head. Interesting, but Wundt's grandfather is documented as having been a member of the Illuminati secret society, making it not unreasonable to imagine that Herr Professor may also have been a member of that group. Wundt, in reflection of a powerful materialistic groundswell in German, thought that began... Okay, let me start again. Wundt, in reflection of a powerful materialistic groundswell in German thought that began with Schopenhauer at the beginning of the 19th century, and that was to be later epitomized by Karl Marx, rejected in cavalier fashion the notion that man might have a soul, or deeper significance than the merely physical, that he was in fact anything more than an animal. Following this line of reasoning, an approach that came to be known in psychology as structuralism, Wundt insisted that all psychological studies should depend entirely on the study of body reactions. The truth of man, Wundt insisted, could be determined solely through mechanistic means, measurement, analysis, and dissection of bodies. After Wundt had thoroughly infused the psychological sciences with his materialistic approach, many scientists and the members of the ruling class that employed them believed that they were justified in treating human beings as if they were pieces of meat, and as an overall plan of action proceeded to do so. The materialistic psychological doctrine spread rapidly, with at least 24 laboratories established by Wundt's students between the years 1883 and 1893, with more of the Germans' acolytes fanning out to infiltrate related fields, such as education. Wundt's materialistic approach would infect the thinking of most of the influential psychologists, psychiatrists, educators, and social planners who would follow in the 20th century. One man who marched to Wundt's dirge was the Russian Ivan Petrovich Pavlov. Pavlov conducted a wide-ranging research into techniques of control, primarily using dogs for his experimentation. In the now famous experiment, Pavlov fed his dogs, stimulating salivation while at the same time ringing a bell. After doing this many times, Pavlov was able to simulate salivation in reaction to the sound of the bell alone. Other of Pavlov's experiments involved rewarding dogs with petting or punishing them with pain. Using these kinds of approaches, Pavlov developed his theory of the conditioned reflex, demonstrating that animals are motivated by patterns of conditioned response, and that conditioning can be artificially induced. The results of Pavlov's experiments did not escape the social planners of his day, nor those who would follow. Chapter 2. Okay, here we go. Here's where it gets interesting. Okay. perfecting inhumanity. Inhumanity. A time-dishonored approach to the manipulation of mankind is through the philosophy and techniques of eugenics. This is the attempted perfecting of humanity through genetic means, selective breeding, sterilization, biological manipulation, and even murder for those considered unfit. The study of eugenics has its beginnings in Germany, sometime after the mid-19th century mark, stimulated by Volkisch concerns for Aryan racial purity. Rudolf Virchow, pathologist and politician, began a study of national ethnic statistics in 1871, convinced that the majority of Germans would prove to be of relatively pure Nordic descent. The results of his studies proved otherwise. According to Virchow, the obvious solution was to set about Nordicizing the debased German stock. The popularity of eugenics theories was given a jump start in England by Francis Galton, a cousin of Charles Darwin. Now, what do we know about Charles Darwin? We know a lot of things about Charles Darwin. One of the things I found out recently about Charles Darwin is that he was definitely a eugenicist, and that he, survival of the fittest, right? But he actually had human human zoos. He had human zoos. Charles Darwin had human zoos, okay? Just FYI. I don't know if you know that, but now you do. Look up human zoos if you haven't. It's quite fascinating. Okay. In 1869, Galton published his book, Hereditary Genius, that Cornell University anthropology professor David Greenwood has called an impassioned brief for hereditary aristocracy that became the first modern document of the modern eugenics movement. Really? Galton was the man who launched the nature versus nurture debate that quietly rages today, arguing for the domination of innate rather than acquired human abilities. Let's read that again. Galton was the man who launched the nature versus nurture debate that quietly rages today, arguing for the domination of innate rather than acquired human abilities. It was Galton's opinion that the human race could be improved by selective breeding and the extermination of the unfit. It hurts even reading this, you guys. Like, it hurts my heart. Like, I have to keep breathing. Okay. Galton once said that he hoped that eugenics would become the religion of the future. Yikes. In the latter part of the century, with endeavors like the Human Genome Project that seeks to map the entirety of human DNA, his hope seems to be moving toward fulfillment. Galton's theories were influenced in part by his examination of the family trees of eminent stuffed shirts in England. He noted that most persons of accomplishment were related to each other. An aristocratic theory of intelligence, thus theoretically putting the aristocracy on a genetic pedestal and rationalizing a stratified society or caste system in Britain and in the world. Even the name of the subject betrays something of its orientation. Galton derived the word eugenics from the Greek word eugenes, meaning well-born. This aggrandizement of the privileged class was one of the reasons why eugenics research found ready support from the moneyed in both America and Europe. It justified their disdain for and parasitism of the masses. Okay, I'm going to read that again. Love this. This aggrandizement of the privileged class was one of the reasons why eugenics research found ready support from the moneyed in both America and Europe. It justified their disdain for and parasitic, right, of the masses. Chairs in eugenics and eugenics in working society were established at the University College in London in 1904, with the Galton Laboratory for National Eugenics founded in 1907. In 1905, in the United States, the Rockefellers and the Carnegies constructed the Eugenics Records Office at Cold Springs Harbor, New York. The Eugenics Records Office at Cold Springs Harbor, New York, where genetic research, none dare call it eugenics, is still being done in 1999. In 1912, the first International Congress of Eugenics was convened at the University of London, presided over by its president, who also happened to be Charles Darwin's son. Okay, so we have the Darwins, the Carnegies, the Rockefellers. The Rothschilds are in there somewhere. Yeah, that's 4 families so far. J.P. Morgan was probably a part of that too. Okay, so we've got those families accounted for, right? All right, here we go. Vice presidents of the Congress included the First Lord of Admiralty, Winston Churchill, M. von Gruber, professor of hygiene at Munich University. Remember that? Munich. Dr. Alfred Plotz, president of the International Society for Race Hygiene. Charles W. Eliot, president emeritus of Harvard. And the inventor of the telephone, Alexander Graham Bell. The Second International Congress of Eugenics was held in 1921, 9 years later, sponsored by the U.S. Secretary of Commerce Herbert Hoover and the presidents of Clark University, Smith College, and Carnegie Institution. Other prominent supporters of eugenics of the period, who will loom large in the history of control to follow, included many members of the American Eastern Establishment, particularly of the Eastern Establishment Dulles and Harriman families. Dulles, D-U-L-L-E-S. From 1907 to 1960, more than 100,000 persons were eugenically sterilized in over 30 states in the United States. It is unlikely that the well-known and horrific Nazi approach to eugenics, brutally carried out in laboratories and concentration camps during World War II, and reportedly claiming hundreds of thousands of victims, would have taken place without eugenics theory having been earlier popularized by British and American scientists and media, and funded by American and British money interests. German eugenics studies were organized and bankrolled by the family-run Rockefeller Foundation and its allies in medicine, industry, and politics, with large grants provided to the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute for Psychiatry and the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute for Anthropology, Eugenics, and Human Heredity in Munich. The latter facility was run by the fascist Swiss psychiatrist Ernst Rudin and his underlings Ottmar Verschuer and Franz J. Kallmann. In 1932, Ernst Rudin was named president of the Worldwide Eugenics Federation. I'm trying to breathe. Rockefeller funding for eugenics research in Germany would continue during World War II. The stated justification being that the war should not impede scientific research. Really? The Kaiser Wilhelm Institute's eugenics studies were initially endowed by Gustav Krupp von Bohlen und Halbach, the head of the Krupp munitions monolith, and James Loeb of the Kuhn-Loeb banking family. Loeb's relatives, the Warburgs, were banking partners of William Rockefeller, and both families were responsible for setting up the American Harriman family, also movers and shakers in eugenics in business. Harriman. Although we know little about what took place in German laboratories, researching mind control and brainwashing during this period, there are some hints. In 1933, the German Reichstag building was burned. In the time-honored tradition of the Patsy, a Dutchman, a mental patient named Marinus van der Lubbe, was arrested and charged with the crime. Psychiatric reports called van der Lubbe an unstable but happy man who lived as a vagabond and entertained notions of changing the world. In court, however, van der Lubbe seemed nothing of the sort, appearing almost completely apathetic, responding dully to questions. On the 42nd day of the trial, 42, van der Lubbe suddenly made a remarkable change. Now he began excitedly talking about inner voices that commanded him. He demanded that he be put to death, and then just as suddenly slumped back into apathy. Van der Lubbe was convicted by the court and executed. Subsequent events made it clear, however, that it was members of the Nazi Party itself who had burned the Reichstag. It is not outside the realm of possibility that van der Lubbe had been brainwashed to take the fall, as many other patsies had been programmed to do in the years that had ensued. After Hitler took control in Germany, Rudin's organizational structure was internalized as part of the Nazi political machine. Rudin was appointed head of the Nazi Racial Hygiene Society, with he and his staff joining the task force on heredity, chaired by Himmler. the group that was to institute the infamous Nazi sterilization laws. I don't know if people realize what happened during that time. Like, I don't think people really actually understand the Holocaust or any of that. Like, I think that people have sort of like, it's been erased from our minds, right? Like from our collective genetics. Like there's been an erasure of our minds, right? So we won't know the truth about what happened there, like that, and has ensued in our society since. Okay. One of Rudin's employees was Joseph Mengele, also known as the Angel of Death, who was to become the medical commandant of Auschwitz and perform his own horrific experimentation upon inmates of the camp. In 1936, the direct predecessor of the CIA's more famous MKUltra mind control program operation was launched at New York State Psychiatric Institute. Funded by the Freemasonic Scottish Rite Northern Supreme Council, and supervised by Dr. Nolan D.C. Lewis, the Masonic Field Representative of Research on Dementia Praecox. The program was directed by Winfried Ovelholzer, a prominent Freemason and the superintendent of St. Elizabeth's Hospital in Washington, D.C., where much CIA mind control experimentation would later take place. In 1943, Ovelholzer went on to become the chairman of the Truth Drug Committee for the OSS, among the earliest mind control research programs instituted by American intelligence. The truth drug is what is now called scopolamine. So if you don't know anything about that, look that up. SCOPOLOMINE, scopolamine. Truth serum. Okay? Which is now a drug on the open market. Like, people are roofing people with it. Okay. In 1936, Ernest Rudin's assistant, Dr. Franz Kallmann, after being exposed in Germany as being half Jewish, emigrated to America, where he established the Medical Genetics Department of the New York State Psychiatric Institute, an operation also funded by the Scottish Rite. In the preface to his Masonic-funded study of schizophrenics, Kallmann wrote that schizophrenics were a source of maladjusted crooks and the lowest types of criminal offenders. This is funny. Even the faithful believers in liberty would be happier without those. He added, I am reluctant to admit the necessity for different eugenics programs for democratic and fascistic communities. There are neither biological nor sociological differences between a democratic and a totalitarian. I am reluctant to admit the necessity for different eugenics programs for democratic and fascistic communities. There are neither biological nor sociological differences between a democratic and a totalitarian schizophrenic. That's a funny statement, you guys. Like, what is that? That's a really funny statement. After World War II, Ottmar Verschuer, who had procured funds for Mengele's experimentation at Auschwitz, was hired by the Rockefeller-funded Bureau of Human Heredity in Denmark, and Rudin, Verschuer, and Kallmann participated in founding the still active American Society of Human Genetics. So you have to understand there's not just Joseph Mengele here. There's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 people. 5 people at least. Okay. There's a lot more than that. But what I'm saying is it wasn't just that guy. It just wasn't one guy. It was a lot of guys. A lot of people. Okay. Where are we? Kalman was elected director of the organization, the American Society of Human Genetics, and would hold that position until 1965. The American Society of Human Genetics is primarily responsible for the current $3 billion Human Genome Project, headquartered at Cold Springs Harbor, the historical center of American eugenics study that is in the forefront of the news today. Okay, I don't know if you guys know about the Human Genome Project. Here's a little admittance. How's this? I, as a baby, was somehow signed up for that. And I used to hear that phrase, the Human Genome Project, or that title, quite a bit. And I was told that my genes or my whatever, my DNA, now we understand it, was being used to research for humanity, to save humankind. This is what I was told as a baby, as a child, like 4 years old. Okay. And so I always thought that I was involved in something really amazing. Like, it was made out to be something that was like profound in terms of I don't know how to put it, but it was a very positive thing, quote unquote, to make me feel as if I was contributing to humanity in a way that served the bigger picture. And but my whole life I was told this, right? I had no idea, what I was involved in, or how I would be affected by it, and what happened, right? What happened there. And I'm sure that my father was well intentioned with that, but it's, nonetheless, at the end of the day, my family was deeply involved in deep state activities and in eugenics and in things that, quite frankly, make me want to throw up on a daily basis. So I was trafficked in many ways, and this is one of those ways. They took blood from me often, and they used my blood, and I was tortured. So just to understand that, like, the reason I am doing this research and trying to understand how this is affecting us now, and why I've done all the work that I've done, and how I've created a system of healing around the dismantling of mind control and how it's affecting our society right now, is because of this, right? Because of my own personal experience of that, and how it affected me as a human being, and how I feel compelled and obligated to change it on a very core level, right? Very deep core level. Let's see. I'm going to keep going for a minute here. The relation of eugenics to British psychiatry bears examination. The primary controlling body for psychiatry in England is the British National Association for Mental Health, NAMH. formed in 1944 and initially run by the mentally unstable Montague Norman, previously of the Bank of England. So a banker went and ran the British National Association for Mental Health. Really? Okay. The group originally met at Norman's London home, where he and Nazi economics minister Jalmar Schacht had met in the 30s to arrange financing for Hitler. NAMH is a renaming and public relations sanitation of the National Councils of Mental Hygiene. Earlier, one of the primary proponents for eugenics programs worldwide and a group that broadly collaborated with Nazi eugenics practitioners prior to World War II. So this is like the original was the National Council of Mental Hygiene, National Councils of Mental Hygiene. It can be seen that the current British psychiatric establishment proceeds in a direct line from the earlier eugenics establishment, much the same as the majority of movers and shapers in American politics have come from eugenics proactive families. Did you hear what I just said? Did you hear what I just read? Okay, let's read that again, shall we? It can be seen that the current British psychiatric establishment proceeds in a direct line from the earlier eugenics establishment, much the same as the majority of movers and shapers in American politics have come from eugenics proactive families. This was written in 1999. I want you to think about who was president in 1999 and prior. Okay? Just think about it. In 1948, NAMH joined forces with the United Nations and the Tavistock Institute. Remember that, Tavistock Institute. A long-term collaboration between British military intelligence and psychiatry. So the NAMH joined forces with the United Nations and the Tavistock Institute. Okay, those three together alone could be called the Trilateral Commission. You know what I'm saying? Just saying. Okay. NAMH and Tavistock convened at an International Congress of Mental Health at the Ministry of Health in London. A World Federation of Mental Health was formed there to coordinate planetary psychological operations. The head of the World Federation was chosen, Brigadier General Dr. John Rawlings Rees, who was also the head of Tavistock. Co-director was Frank Fremont Smith, the chief medical officer of the Macy Foundation, an organization that was later to be a primary funding source for the CIA's MKUltra mind control projects. Vice presidents of NAMH included Tavistock psychiatrist and eugenics activist Professor Cyril Burt, Dr. Hugh Crichton Miller, a founder of Tavistock, psychiatrist Sir David Henderson, author of Psychiatry and Race Betterment, Lord Thomas Jeeves Horter, the president of the Eugenics Society of Great Britain, and the Family Planning Association. Family Planning Association. Pro-Nazi psychiatrist Carl Jung, who was also the psychiatrist for the Dulles family, Dulles. Dr. Winfried Oberholzer, representative of the Scottish Rite Masons, and Dr. Alfred Frank Treadgold, of the British Ministry of Health's Committee on Sterilization. Although eugenics organizations and activists sought deep cover after the defeat of Hitler, something of the stench of the death camps clinging to the subject, the same programs to weed out the inferiors from mankind would continue with the same personnel or their successors in charge of the programs. Working out of the family offices of the Rockefellers in the United States. The Eugenics Society, now metamorphosized into the Society for the Study of Social Biology. The Society for the Study of Social Biology. How many times do they have to change their freaking name? Okay? Seriously. So many times. Why? Because they have to stay hidden. Why? Because they have to keep changing, because people keep finding out about them and calling them out. Okay? Now they're all getting called out and they're going fucking down. Just saying. Okay. Although it has been a carefully guarded secret by the watchdogs of the... Oh my God, are you ready for this? This is so good. I love this dude. Okay. Although it has been a carefully guarded secret by the watchdogs of the mainstream media, the eugenics programs were never discontinued worldwide, with involuntary sterilization programs continuing in many countries to this day. This was written in 1999, people. Information has only recently surfaced that sterilization programs for those considered to be unfit because of genetics or behavior continued to exist in Scandinavia and in France until the 70s. At the same time, massive involuntary sterilization programs continue to be implemented in the third world, which I consider personally the first world, but okay. The only world. Eugenics practice has continued in Australia, where more than 1,000 intellectually disabled women have been illegally sterilized since 1991. So when he wrote this was 8 years after that. So 1,000 women in 8 years that were intellectually disabled in Australia were illegally sterilized between 1991 and 1999. Okay. The Human Rights and Equal Opportunity Commission discovered that 1,043 sterilization operations, only 17 of them approved by the court as mandated by Australian law, had been performed. The number of such operations may in fact have been several times as high. The number of such operations may in fact have been several times as high, since only operations performed using medical insurance were registered. In 1974, I'm sorry you guys that I'm so tense, but it's so hard to read this. Like, I'm having to breathe through this every step of the way. In 1974, Federal District Judge Court Gerhard Giselle estimated that over the last few years, between 100,000 and 150,000 low-income persons had been sterilized under federally funded programs in the United States. Giselle stated an indefinite number of those sterilized were improperly coerced into accepting sterilization. Oh, right. Involuntary consent. You heard that term? One of the prime target groups for sterilization in the United States has been the Native American population. According to Ruth Ann Evanoff, in an article titled Reproductive Rights and Occupational Health, states that overall, at least 25% of the Native women of childbearing age have been sterilized, although the total population numbers less than 1 million. Recent reports estimate that the percentage sterilized in one tribe alone, the Northern Cheyenne, is 80%. An oft-cited jurisdiction for current eugenics practice is the elimination of violence in society. Really? Let me read that again. An oft-cited justification for current eugenics practice is the elimination of violence in society. Really? Really? At this time, millions of dollars are being spent on research into the control of violence through genetic means. Okay, so in 1992, a report was produced jointly by the National Academy of Science and the National Research Council, titled Understanding and Preventing Violence. Among the groups funding the report were the Centers for Disease Control, the CDC, a privately owned firm, the U.S. Justice Department, and the National Science Foundation. Who was president in 1992? Think about it. The report suggested that more studies should be done on biological and genetic factors in violent crime. Oh, might I remind you that in 1991 there was a secret meeting with all of the A&R reps and all of the musicians in the rapping industry and the music industry behind locked closed doors, where they were told what they were going to do to incite violence through rap music in Hollywood. Who was president then? Just saying. The report suggested that more studies should be done on biological and genetic factors in violent crime, and suggested that the higher crime rates among black males might come from a genetic predisposition. Really? 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 By the way, look up Boys Town. In England, concerns are similar. The Department of Health has recently commissioned a research into delinquency gene called Fragile X. According to the London Sunday Times, it is believed by some scientists that 1 in every 259 women carry the defective Fragile X gene, which causes a lack of brain protein, resulting in antisocial behavior. Health officials are planning to engage in mass screenings so that women who carry the defective gene can be alerted and induced to abort their children. I'm exhausted from reading that. One of the reports here in the bibliographical situation, right, where they talk about the genetic predisposition, is recent FDA decision highlights ethical issues in drug research on children. Okay. Dumbing Us to Death is the next chapter, and I will continue on another day. I am just exhausted from reading the first 2 chapters, and I'm only on page 21. Just saying. So, what do I want to talk about here? I want to talk about what this actually looks like in terms of what we are in now. So, I don't know if you guys have ever heard of the guy that wrote, is it a paper or a book called Propaganda? I'm trying to remember the name of it right now. Oh goodness, can't remember, sorry. It's a guy that talked about mind control in terms of bringing it forth into the population through media. And propaganda author. Propaganda book. There we go. Oh yes, Edward Bernays. Edward L. Bernays, Bernays, in 1928 incorporated the literature from social science and psychological manipulation into the examination of the techniques of public communication. Bernays wrote the book in response to the success of some of his earlier works, such as Crystallizing Public Opinion in 1923 and A Public Relations Council in 1927. Propaganda explored the psychology behind manipulating masses and the ability to use symbolic action and propaganda to influence politics, effect social change, and lobby for gender and racial equality. Walter Lippmann was Bernays' unacknowledged American mentor, and his work, The Phantom Public, greatly influenced the ideas expressed in Propaganda a year later. The work propelled Bernays into media historians' view of him as the father of public relations. This is the Wikipedia definition of this guy, okay, of this book. So what we have is a concerted effort to remove the profundity of the soul from the person, right? So that the person can be controlled. And to approach people, humans, as animals that can be steered and swayed and not able to discern their own voice and to be able to hear a higher frequency that is they are connected to and not separate from, right? So to me, the audacity, right? Like for me, it's just like, oh my God, are you fucking kidding me right now? And the way that I was manipulated as a child and actually groomed, I was groomed, right, to think a certain way. I was groomed to be an elitist. I was groomed to be a world leader. I was groomed to be very specifically designed for their purposes, right? And to withstand anything, and literally Apache training. Like I went through Apache tests, like where I would just get thrown a bunch of stuff and see how I would survive. Literally, like all the time, they would test me. They called it Apache training, and or they call it that. And that's something that I've dealt with my entire life. And it's a way to keep it's trauma-based mind control, really. But it's also a way to strengthen and to sharpen shine the diamond, right? To see how pristine the frequency can become of a human being. So, yeah. It worked to their disadvantage this time because they can't control me, right? So they still try, and they still try to distract, and they do all these things through dreams and like all kinds of stuff that they'll attempt to try to get to distract me. But at this point, it's definitely more. I'm definitely in control of my vehicle now. You know, I'm fully incarnated and in my embodiment. I'm fully embodied. So it's really difficult, even in my dream space, for them to get in or to have any influence over me. So the only way that I can weaken in that regard is if I'm not paying attention for whatever reason, or, you know, something like that. But I'm always paying attention. So there you have it. um, so I just wanted to read that to you tonight. And I just, you know, that's a lot to chew on. You might want to go back and listen to it again. I encourage that, actually. Just to listen to the words and not to my visuals, but just to hear what this guy has to say about engineering human consciousness. And his name again is Jim Keith. He's one of the foremost writers and researchers on political conspiracy in the world today, back in 1999. His books include Black Helicopters Over America, Mind Control and UFOs, Case Book on Alternative 3. Oh, hey, there it is, Agenda 21. The Gemstone File, Casebook on the Men in Black, and other classics in the literature of conspiracy. Yeah, and the other one was Mind Control, World Control. So yeah, this dude is like for real, real. And I'm actually I got this in England, funny enough. I got this in England in 2016, I think, at a thrift store in Glastonbury. Oh, that's funny. Okay, anyway, love you guys. Thanks for being here. Thanks for listening. I don't even know who's here because nobody's made a comment, but I love you. Thanks for showing up. Bye. Breathe deep. Love yourself. Lay on the earth. I love you.